Okay, good morning, good afternoon, year 11. This is Mr. Morgan.
And Mr. Morgan.
Fantastic. What we thought we'd do, along with our other videos so far, we thought we'd put together a little kind of short revision kind of video that you can watch just regarding the different set works. Today we are going to be looking at Beethoven's Piano Sonata number 8, and we'll be looking at the first movement known as Pathetique.
So Pathetique is a French term which means to be emotional or moving. This is a good example of how Beethoven was starting to become more emotional with the way that he was writing his music. This piece is written for solo piano. No prizes for knowing that one. It is the only instrument on this piece. However, it's worth pointing out this is the classical period, and the harpsichord, which we know so much about because of Purcell and Bach, that's now on the scrap heap. The Baroque period is over. The piano has been invented, and it is an awful lot better than the harpsichord, or at least it is more versatile. It can play dynamics, which means if you play it a bit softer, then actually it plays quieter. If you play very suddenly and quite hard, then it will play louder. Also, the piano is able to sustain the notes. You know that the harpsichord players would be busy playing scales and ornaments everywhere to try and fill up the sound, but now the piano is able just to play a chord and for the chord to carry on with the sound.
Mainly for the fact that the piano, the strings are hit with a hammer, and then the string then can continue to vibrate. Now, this piece was written sometime between 1796 and 1799.
That means that this is written during the classical period, but it is important to point out that this is the very end of the classical period. We are moving towards the Romantic period. This is noticeable because of the emotion and the sort of feeling of that being put into the music, which becomes a characteristic of the Romantic period. Beethoven was one of the first real composers that bridged the gap from classical into Romantic. However, please do not get confused. This was written during the classical period. It is a classical piano sonata.
The title says that it is in the key of C minor. This is correct. During our closer analysis of the score that will follow this brief introduction, we'll see that there are some modulations in with that, but are predominantly in C minor.
The piece starts off in 4/4. The speed is incredibly slow. The marking on your score is grave. However, it moves from 4/4 into 2/2, which on your score is actually shown with a C with a line down the middle. This is referred to as cut common. Common time is 4/4, so to cut that in half is 2/2. That means 2 minims per bar, and it normally suggests that the piece is going to be very quick because you're now counting minims as your main beat, which allows you to sort of beat. Despite beating a steady beat, you have a very fast pulse.
Brilliant. Structure. So this kind of became quite a popular structure during the classical period of music. This is known as sonata form. Sonata form, we start with our exposition, our kind of first and second subject. We then go on to hear the development. Very often in the classical period, this would often modulate to the dominant. And then we get recapitulation, which kind of revisit the initial first and second subject. Hopefully that is above our heads right now to make it very clear.
It is worth pointing out that Beethoven, as we mentioned, a late classical composer, he by this stage is now being a little bit more creative with how he uses this structure. So our piece has an introduction, which has a different tempo. It also has a coda, which is a tail part, which is basically an ending, like an outro. And actually, he does use the part of the introduction a little bit later on at the beginning of the development. So although it is the classical structure that we know, of sonata form, he has been a little bit more creative with this.
Fantastic. What we'll do now is we'll show you the music from the beginning and do a little bit of a closer analysis. Okay, so it starts off very, very loud, grave, very slow, with the opening statement that begins by moving up in fourths and then continues to rise during the first 4 bars, giving it a real sense of kind of intense sort of build throughout the introduction.
Yeah, there is a strong use of diminished 7th chords. You can see one on beat 3 of bar 1 as an example. This is a chord based up on minor 3rd intervals that is used throughout the piece.
There's a lot of use of dotted rhythms, again, really trying to help kind of accent the rhythm.
Also, as mentioned earlier on, this piece is written for piano, and one of the great things that Beethoven was able to do with this composition is create lots of sudden contrast in dynamics, where it's going from fortissimo immediately to piano.
Okay, as we can see here as it's moving on, this is exploiting the range of the piano, using, sudden change between very high notes down to, kind of particular lower register throughout the piece.
A great example of this is found at the end of the introduction in bar 10, where there is a virtuosic rapid chromatic scale going from very high up in the register all the way down. Remember, a virtuoso would have been an extremely talented musician, so pieces of music written to show off that talent.
Okay, now we're straight into the exposition. This is the first subject in C minor, and the time signature has changed to 2 minims in a bar.
We have an ascending melody and a murky bass line with the tonic pedal notes in the bass line. There's broken chord patterns and again use of the diminished 7th.
The broken chords continue. This is the transition section then, which modulates to G minor. You can see the pedal in the bass.
There's a rising chromatic bass line, which is indicating changes of keys.
And at the end of this page and into the second, you'll notice the hands cross.
Okay, this is now the second subject. We've gone to E flat minor. This is quite unexpected. We've got chord 1 for 4 bars, chord 5, which is an imperfect cadence, then resolving to chord 1. Periodic phrasing, which is balanced 4-bar phrases, and the use of ornamentation. In this example, it's an acciatura.
Okay, so we have a rinforzando, a reinforced or accented notes. And again, we're about to get the second part of the second subject, which modulates to E flat major. This is the relative major of C minor. Yeah. Notice also we have the Alberti bass that's appearing very often within the left hand.
Yep, from bar 89 to 98, we have, from 101 rather, we are repeating bars 89 to 98.
Okay, we have a short codetta here. E flat major is hinting back at the first subject. The codetta is a small ending. Okay, now we've repeated now the exposition. We're going to repeat back through the first and second subject. We'll join you again at the development to give you some closer analysis.
Okay, we are now back moving through the piece, and we are into the development. It's actually starting with material from the introduction. So we've got the tempo 1, the original tempo in 4/4 with our sforzandos. Notice in bar 3 though, Beethoven starts writing using D sharps rather than E flat. This is because it is leading towards E minor. We get to 137 and we are straight into a 2/2 time signature with a key of E minor. This moves briefly to D major and then again to G minor. So this is the development of the first subject.
Okay, as it continues, you'll notice we have octave figures that we've heard previously in the left hand, but we're now hearing them in the right hand of the melody.
Okay, notice in the left hand here we have a dominant pedal. The long dominant note pedal waiting to be resolved is known as a dominant preparation.
Okay, this dominant preparation continues up until we then get the monophonic texture, which is leading to the recapitulation. You'll notice that there's just a single line of melody that moves through the hands and resolves into C minor.
Okay, we have now got back to the first subject in the recapitulation. We're in C minor. At the bottom of this page, you'll notice that the modified melody does actually end on a C major chord briefly, and this is lining us up to move into the return of the second subject, which in a moment will come up, and you'll see that it's in F minor. So that C has helped create a perfect cadence. Okay, the main characteristic of this part here, nearing the end of the development, is the circle of fifths. You can see that we're moving from G to C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat. This is where every chord or movement is a fifth away from the previous.
Okay, as we move towards the end of the development section, you'll notice that the variation of the melody, we end up then getting to kind of full bar chords, particularly finishes with 2 diminished 7th chords played fortissimo using both hands in the full range of the piano.
Okay, so now we've actually got to the Coda, and this uses material from the intro and the first subject. So the first 4 bars are very similar to the introduction that we heard in 4/4, incredibly slow, where then we move at bar 299 to a quick recap of the first subject, back with 2/2, incredibly quick, ends with loud detached chords and finishing with a very strong, perfect cadence.